It's time now for the political analysis of Fromm and Fuller. Al Fromm, former political advisor to President Bill Clinton, and Craig Fuller, former political advisor to both President Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush. Good morning, all. Craig, while most of the United States remains captivated by the news coverage of the Russian war against Ukraine, Republican-controlled state houses seem to be doubling down on passing conservative social legislation. One example would be Florida's parental rights and education bill, which opponents dubbed the Don't Say Gay bill. Another has been in Virginia, where the new GOP governor is leading an effort to eliminate the instruction of critical race theory in that state's public schools. And all this is being done after Texas and Alabama have passed some of the most restrictive anti-abortion laws in the country. These Republican initiatives seem to be at odds with national public opinion when GOP candidates may need moderate voters to take over the Congress in November. Does this make sense as a viable political strategy on their part?
Well, Dave, you have raised a really interesting and I think somewhat complicated question. I put all of this in the category of sort of a single issue orientation, which there's nothing wrong with, and groups have done it for a long time. I first really encountered it with a fellow who wanted George Herbert Walker Bush to sign the tax pledge card, which said he would never raise taxes if elected. And I found it kind of, odd that somebody who wasn't, in fact, not elected to anything would thrust this card in front of us and say, would you please sign it? But that was the only issue that this fellow was interested in. And the question of parental rights has actually been around for quite a while. I had to actually to check, but I remembered Pat Buchanan talking about it. And indeed he did. In 1992, at the Republican convention, which he gave a pretty fiery speech, he criticized Hillary Clinton for what he said was comparing marriage and family institutions to slavery and life on Indian reservations, which seemed odd at the time. It was actually based on something she'd written back in 1973 as a scholarly document, but it drove people, kind of crazy at a convention. And in fact, it started something called Of the People, which was led by a woman named Betsy DeVos, who would later become Secretary of Education. I cite this because the movement around the issue of parental rights has been with us for a long period of time. And in many ways, the people who care most about this are almost impervious to all the other issues that affect us. It's very different than working inside a political party. Other groups have now formed. There's a free to learn coalition that's formed. There's an American Principles Project, which raises about $1 million a year, which is not insignificant, but kind of small as a national organization. But they're at the heart of driving this issue. And what they have found, and I apologize for the generalization, but there's within the Republican Party a trend among many in there to favor personal liberty, and within the Democratic Party, a group that tends to favor doing things for the common good. And so some of these groups around parental rights have definitely driven right into the mix of those in the Republican Party who favor personal liberty. And again, it's been going on for a long time. What has happened is that two things, I think. One, you have the example in Virginia where the issue of what happens in the classroom became a real live issue, and there was a differentiation between a Republican and a Democratic candidate, and the Republican became governor. The other thing I think that's going on is that COVID has changed the equation somewhat. So now suddenly parents are a lot more aware of what their children are seeing, what's being taught. They have access to school boards. They see these discussions. And so the single issue orientation of these groups can have a greater impact on more people. And I will just say, to close this, that I still think that this probably has more to do with motivating voters than actually governing down the road. But it certainly is moving in places like Virginia to real issues. But it does motivate voters. It does motivate a group within the Republican Party. And I think it's going to be with us. It's been with us a long time. I think it's going to be with us for quite some time into the future.
Al, let me turn to you. Does this make sense?
Let me first say to my friend Craig, Grover Norquist, who made George Bush, H.W. Bush sign and most other Republicans incidentally, sign the no tax pledge, was not on our payroll, but we thank him. My first encounter with single issue politics was in the great state of Maryland, right when I moved here. I worked for Joe Tidings, Bobby Kennedy's best friend, great senator, late great senator from Maryland. And he was the biggest proponent of gun control. And the NRA and the gun lobby got him in their sights. He decided to run a campaign saying he'd never duck the tough ones. Well, this is when he should have ducked, because he got beat by an unknown congressman from Western Maryland named Glenn Bell. The answer to your question, if this were a different year, an ordinary year, and if these were national issues, it would make a difference. In an off-year election, with so many other important issues looming, and particularly in Florida and Texas and Alabama and Virginia, it's not going to make a difference at all. As Craig's already talked about, the parental rights issue, well, and so, I mean, it certainly didn't hurt the Republicans in the gubernatorial election, and nationally, critical race theory is, about a 41 to 53 issue, according to the Economist YouGov poll. And in the suburbs where the swing districts are, it's 43 to 56, so it's down 13. It's not an issue that you'd probably run to expand your base. I mean, there are just too many big issues in a country now that about a quarter of the people think the country's going in the right direction. We're going at war. Inflation is the dominant issue, and nationally, stunned to find this, but about 57 to 6, people think inflation is more important than unemployment. And in the suburbs, that's 62 to 4. Biden, as we try to raise the Biden's approval ratings, he's probably not going to win by just talking about unemployment. People aren't worried about that anymore. And then you have other issues like crime, a 92 to 7 issue in terms of importance in the suburbs, and about 90% important to all voters. Those are the issues that are going to dominate. As we said last week, the war will probably play a big factor, and we don't know how that's going to work out. But I can't imagine in states that are probably going to vote for one party anyway, these cultural issues, as much as I might disapprove of them, are going to make any difference.
Back to Craig for a second. The other thing that probably will be taking place over the next couple of months is that the Supreme Court will probably strike down Roe versus Wade in some fashion. And I can't help but believe that that could be a motivating factor as you go into the midterms.
Well, there's no question it's a motivating factor for some, and maybe for many. I think it gets back, though, to how does it affect people seeking the nomination? Because I agree with Al that these single issue approaches probably don't measure up to the bigger, larger national issues in the November election. But when you're running in a cluster of 3 or 4 of the Republicans or Democrats, if you can motivate a group of people on whether it's the Roe versus Wade issue, or whether it's the parental rights issue, or whether it's masks, or whatever it may be, if you can motivate a small but active group to come out and help you, you can get over the threshold to get the nomination. That's why I say this is more about campaigning than about governing. I wanted to read a quote going back to our other point, because we're those of us who have worked in Washington. I know people consider us as sort of some kind of political elite, but Al and I try to keep our ear to the ground. But we talk about these large national issues, but we talk about them in a way that's different, very different than the way the single issue candidates speak. And so I looked up the American Principles Project. This is a small group of people. They raise $1 million and they spend it on themselves, and they promote their work to around the country. But here's what they say. If they, whoever they is, if they want to attack parental rights, confuse young children about changing their gender, undermine the ability of parents to protect their children's innocence, or drive a wedge between parents and children in education, then they are going to be punished at the polls. That's the language that's being used, and it gets people riled up. Ironically, it comes from this group who is a 501c3 nonprofit group that says it doesn't get involved in elections, but their purpose is to spread this message. And again, but will it play in November? If at all, in very few places. But I do think this, combined with Roe versus Wade decision, could well affect some of these primary races and give rise to candidates who can motivate a group within probably the Republican Party.
Al, you have the last word.
I guess I'd say if Roe versus Wade is overturned, it would cross that threshold to be a national issue. And I think it would motivate a lot of people, particularly a lot of women in the suburbs. And I guess as I look at 2022, I mean, for Democrats, that'd be a good thing. It probably would be a counter, or at least a partial counter, to the trends that are now seem overwhelmingly Republican in those swing districts and in the national vote. And I honestly don't think it will be the central issue in the election. In 2018, when you had an unpopular president of the other party, and you had the threat just to women generally, and on Roe versus Wade to a little bit, to some degree, because of Trump and who he was, it really galvanized the Democrats and Democratic women, and we won. And we also put up moderate candidates, which was very important in those swing districts, and we won 42 seats. Now, I don't think that's going to happen this time, even if the court overturns Roe versus Wade, because we're starting in a deep hole instead of probably a little bit ahead. And in 2018, we had the largest Democratic plurality ever in the cumulative vote for Congress in a midterm election. Well, that's clearly not going to happen this time. What I would say, if we have an issue like Roe versus Wade that is a national issue that has broad-based support among women and suburban voters, and the Democrats can keep their progressives in line, which is a very important thing, and put up moderate candidates in those districts, we might have a fighting chance to cut our losses even fairly substantially. But if we, we're going to have a battle for a Supreme Court nominee in the Senate, And to be honest with you, the conventional wisdom is going to help the Democrats get their base excited and all that. My concern is it'll get our base overexcited, and that will do things that will scare away suburban voters. So if you keep away from defunding the police, Nancy Pelosi and Joe Biden both had to denounce it in major appearances. Biden, his State of the Union. You keep away from issues like that. Maybe an overturn of Roe versus Wade would help us cut those losses, and I'd say hopefully retain the Congress, but I think that's unlikely.
We have to leave it there. Al Fromm, Craig Fuller, thank you very much indeed. We'll see you next week.